and we will get started with our next presentation by Ely Holmes. I've been so excited to hear about their work. It has been spoken of throughout campus many times, this research, so I'm very excited. Without further ado, I will introduce Ely Holmes, who will be presenting on the transgender experience in the therapeutic setting, assisted by their wonderful Dr. Melissa Bellis.
Hi everyone, my name is Ely Holmes. I use he/they pronouns, and I'm going to be presenting on my research on the transgender experience in the therapeutic setting. So, a history of transgender people in psychology. I did want to give a brief overview. So, we were previously described in the DSM, which is kind of a guide for practitioners as mentally ill. So I did want to name that. And then, additionally, gender and sexuality variation were both seen as the same thing. And they were also seen as an inversion, which basically means that transgender and gender fluid people were seen as a deviation from what is considered normal. In addition to that, presenting outside of your assigned birth sex was illegal for a time due to anti-cross-dressing laws in a lot of places in the US. So today, when a group faces discrimination and stigma, they're more vulnerable to mental illness, and I did want to make that apparent. Additionally, in recent years, there's been an increase in both media coverage of trans people as well as anti-transgender legislation. Because this discrimination is still present, even in the realm of psychology, I wanted to focus my thesis on what does work for transgender individuals in therapeutic spaces, and examine what happens when they seek out therapy and kind of enter into this realm of psychology. So my current study, I chose to do an IRB-approved study for my thesis, and the goal of the study was to provide a greater understanding of what works well for transgender individuals in therapy, as well as examine what characteristics transgender therapy clients look for in a therapist. So to be eligible, participants needed to be 18 years of age or older. They needed to identify as transgender or genderqueer, and they also needed to have some kind of experience as a client in therapy or counseling. Recruitment was done through email and social media from the St. Edward's community mainly, and we recruited by sending my survey out to groups that I knew would meet the requirements. For example, the Trans Wellness Board here on campus. And then participants who were eligible were then asked open-ended questions such as, what has your therapist or counselor done that has made you feel validated in your gender identity? They also answered closed-ended questions, asking them to rate how much they agreed with statements like, my therapist or counselor asks respectful questions about my gender identity. For the sake of time, though, I did want to note that I will only be presenting on the open-ended questions. So we had 9 participants. The mean age was 23.1 years old, and gender-wise, we had 5 trans-masculine participants, 1 trans-feminine participant, and 3 who were non-binary. We conducted a thematic analysis. There were 3 coders for this, so there was a transgender man, 2 cisgender women, and all of the coders involved had experience as a client in therapy. I also wanted to note that one of the coders is also a counseling psychologist, and I also myself have taken a course on counseling psychology, so a lot of the language that I'll be using in the presentation today comes from that. For my results, the first question I'll present on was, what has your therapist or counselor done that has made you feel validated in your gender identity? We asked this question to gain insight on what works when it comes to making trans clients feel validated and understood by their therapist, which helps build that very necessary trusting therapeutic relationship. So in doing our thematic analysis, we found these main 2 themes of verbal and nonverbal affirmation. For verbal affirmation, this looked like a lot of different things for different participants. So we had gendered language, so that's going to be your correct name use, things like correct pronoun use. We also had verbal processing. So this was clients being able to talk through identity-specific issues with their therapist, as well as the therapist sharing stories that were relevant. We also found a theme of acknowledgement of unique experiences. So under that category, we have provided help with accessing gender-affirming surgery, gender-affirming medical care, as well as recognizing the unique struggles of transgender people. For the nonverbal affirmation, we only found 2 subthemes. We found creating an affirming, judgment-free atmosphere and nonverbal validation of gender identity. So here's a quote from a trans feminine participant on what made them feel validated. They said, "When I would show my therapist pictures of what I looked like pre-transition, she found it very shocking to think that me, the woman sitting across from her, was ever anything like that." And I think that that quote really encapsulates both the nonverbal and the verbal affirmation pieces. For the next question, we asked participants what lesson or skill that you have learned in therapy or counseling has been most effective for you when it comes to coping with specifically gender-related issues. And we asked this question because we wanted to better understand what lessons and skills are particularly helpful for coping with the unique struggles and experiences of being a transgender person. And these are the 4 main themes that we came across in response to that question. So we found that the responses had themes of self-image, perspective-taking, general coping skills, and some people even said that they did not learn a skill. For self-image, participants stated that they had learned how to validate themselves, how to self-advocate, and that they had learned to become more self-assured. And then here's a quote about self-validation from the self, or self-validation. "It's not so much important how other people will see me and perceive my gender, but how I perceive myself." This was from a non-binary participant. And I did want to note that this validation of identity is internal rather than external, like coming from a therapist or something of that sort. The next big theme we found in this question's responses can be summed up as general coping skills. So one participant cited journaling as a coping skill. Participants also said that they learned emotional regulation skills, that they received psychoeducation from their therapist, and that they found ways to manage comorbidities. So these were the sub-themes for general coping skills. And then we also found an initial theme of participants learning perspective-taking skills. These skills included radical acceptance, and I did want to note that participants did not specifically share this, but we do in the realm of psychology recognize that radical acceptance is a dialectical behavioral therapy skill. We also found self-love and self-assuredness in sub-themes. And then lastly for this question is no skill. So one participant was unsure whether or not they had learned a lesson or skill in therapy or not, and one other participant stated that they did not learn a lesson or a skill at all. So I think it's really important to note that not all of the participants were even able to learn a skill or lesson from a therapist. And I think that this really highlights the importance of trans people being able to actually access care that is culturally competent. So the last question I'll be presenting on is, what qualities would you look for in a therapist? So when participants were asked this question, we found another 4 themes. The first one is therapist background and accessibility. There were 3 sub-themes for this theme. Participants would seek out a therapist who was within their insurance network for that financial affordability and accessibility. They also said that they looked for someone who specialized in any comorbid health concerns, and one participant even said that they prefer a therapist who shared their identity. And then this one's interesting. It was a theme that I wasn't really expecting to find, and it's directness. Several participants wanted a therapist who had this quality. There were 3 sub-themes that were desired in this potential therapist under directness. Firmness, giving tangible advice that the client could then take and use in the real world, and providing an outside perspective in that direct manner. And then cultural competence. Cultural competence was a really important theme in this study. The participants did not use the words cultural competence directly, but that's what many of them were describing. So participants' responses showed sub-themes such as cultural humility, with expressing genuine curiosity under that category. They also valued therapist allyship. So for example, having a statement on their website that said that they were LGBTQ friendly, and cultural knowledge of trans experiences. And then we have a quote. So for that cultural humility, specifically genuine curiosity piece, a trans masculine participant, when they were asked this question, said that they wanted a therapist who was gender affirming and respectful of my sexual orientation. not asking questions as if to question my identity or sexual orientation, making it sound more like legitimate curiosity instead of I'm analyzing you to make sure that I believe you. And I do want to note that expressing genuine curiosity is a very important part of showing cultural humility. So then there's common factors. Common factors are essentially things that all therapists should do across, disciplines, theoretical orientations. So for example, show empathy. And the common factors, sub-themes we found are acceptance and understanding. And then here are my main outcomes. So small things, or things that seem small, like correct name use and correct pronoun use, really do matter to clients. We also know that therapy that fails to validate one's gender identity can be very damaging. And the source that I cited here is specifically referring to something called gender exploratory therapy, which has a lot of negative impacts on transgender therapy clients. And then also cultural competence is very important. And cultural competence takes on certain characteristics for trans clients, such as those that I named earlier on under that theme. And then cultural competence for future therapists and counselors. I know that there's a lot of psychology students who want to go into counseling, and I would suggest use the correct name and pronouns for clients in sessions, and if it's safe to, outside of sessions. Ask questions from a place of genuine curiosity that goes into that cultural humility. Stay knowledgeable about transgender identities and issues that goes into cultural knowledge, and be open about your allyship. So again, several participants stated that they wanted to see a statement on their website that said that they were LGBTQ friendly. And then, those are my sources. Oh wait, sorry, I skipped ahead. Considerations for potential transgender clients. I would say if you're looking for therapy, advocate for yourself when you're looking for a therapist. It's really important to find a good therapeutic match. Try to find a therapist that is openly LGBTQ friendly. Again, some are going to state it on their website. And also, specializations are important if you have any comorbid mental health concerns. The limitations of my study, I did want to name that there was a pretty small sample size, there were only 9 participants. And I also did want to recognize that I felt the trans feminine population was a bit underrepresented in this study, just because we only had 1 participant who identified as trans feminine. And then here are my sources. And then thank you so much to everyone. Thank you so much to my advisor. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Ely. That was wonderful. I'd like to open it up for questions or comments from the audience, if they have anything, please.
Ely, that was an awesome presentation. I was wondering to what extent did your participants find it important that the therapist may also identify as trans or non-binary? Does that seem as less, or is that less important?
So we actually only had 1 participant mention that, but I did think it was a significant enough thing to include in the presentation. I think it really depends on the person, but we didn't have a whole lot of data on that, unfortunately.
I can say that as a trans person, I would always, I think, in every circumstance, choose a therapist who is transgender or shared my identity over someone who didn't. It's just, we're so underrepresented in pretty much every field that I feel like most people didn't put that because it's simply not something that we ever see. But I and a lot of people that I might be much more comfortable.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see with like the way society progresses, if that is going to be potentially a theme in the scene in the future. I think that would be really interesting.
I really focus on but was there any feedback you had regarding those? Any questions that you were willing to share?
We didn't get a whole lot of time to do a lot of data analysis on those questions, unfortunately, so I can't really share a whole lot of information about it. We chose to focus more on the open-ended questions just because we found some really rich responses in those.
Did you notice any universal experiences between all the people that you got to talk to?
I think everyone's experiences varied slightly, which I thought was very interesting. There were, again, the themes that we found. Some, like, cultural competence was a big one. That one was pretty universal, but again, everyone's responses were actually pretty different.
So when you were collecting background for your research, especially being that this is a newer space for at least psychology, did you find it difficult to find research that was specifically related to the transgender experience, and how comfortable were you citing research that was generalized to the therapeutic setting rather than specifically the transgender experience?
So there's actually a pretty good amount of research nowadays about specifically the transgender experience, but as it relates to the therapeutic setting, there's not as much. So yes, I did struggle with that aspect, but thankfully there is a little bit more research being done.
I was curious if if you thought about future studies looking at therapists, like specifically in Austin. I know we have at least 2 trans therapists who focus on trans clients, right? Kate Coons and Avery Erickson are two that I know. So I was curious if you were looking at that lens too, if that would be useful.
I hadn't thought of that yet, but I think that for future research that could be really, really interesting, especially if we get more trans therapists. I think that I could be looking in that direction. I think that the field, I think it'd be really interesting study to do.
Research is so great. Such a pleasure. Another hand.
I am so proud of Eli. I first met Eli last year in my psychopathology class. So I was showing myself very bright, very motivated. When he came up with this idea, he said, recognize that this isn't a represented part of our research and wanting to support it anyway. He did a tremendous job, also motivated and so very passionate.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.